Hello, I am Professor Julio Rezende. I'm from Brazil, and I'm coordinator of Space Analog Station Habitat Marketing and professor in the University Federal of Rio Grande do Norte State in Brazil. Today is December 19th, 2021, and we have the wonderful webinar done by Professor Karin Brunnemann. She'll be talking about space psychology, what do we know and what we need still have to research. Okay, I'll be reading about a little about his curriculum. Karin Brunnemann has degrees in psychology and business information systems. She's also studied intercultural business communications and is currently pursuing a doctoral degree in management. She has 30 years of experience working in and managing international projects in different industries, and has been focusing in the space sector for the past years. Karin is a consultant and a project manager at several space companies and research organizations with a special interest in psychology and intercultural issues in future Mars exploration. She is a flight planner for the Austrian Space Forum AMADI 20 analog Mars mission, and has participated in several virtual analog missions at Habitat Marte. Karin is also a project manager and researcher at Echo Encounter Space, based in Slovakia and Israel, and she's a lecturer and guest lecturer in various universities worldwide for topics related to psychology, project management, and intercultural competence. She's a regular speaker at space-related events and conferences. Karin, thanks so much for your interest to be with us and also collaborate with Habitat Marte Space Analog Station. Also, I'd like to know. Also, I'd like to say that we are open to applications for next year, also virtual missions and in-person missions, and everybody are welcome to participate. And thanks so much also to collaborate in the mission 91 or 89 with some other participants from many parts of the world. And you are very welcome to complement some points that I'm bringing now, and good luck in your presentation.
Thank you very much, Professor Julio. Yeah, it's a great honor and pleasure talking about this topic here today, space psychology, which is still a bit of a niche topic in the space industry. And Julia has already introduced me a little bit. I just wanted to go into a little bit more depth as to how I became interested in the topic of space psychology. So I have a master's degree in psychology, not in space psychology, because as far as I'm aware, you cannot study that anywhere yet. But I have done a lot of self-education in the field. I have complemented my studies of psychology with a course at Duke University in human physiology, because many psychological concepts we see in space exploration are based on the human physiology. Yeah, for example, stress as a concept, we can't measure stress directly. What we can measure is stress hormones. It's the heartbeat rate of a person, it's the skin conductivity. So these are actually physiological measurements defining a psychological concept. Hence, I thought it would be a good add-on to my psychological studies. Apart from that, I have from early childhood been interested in space exploration. I caught the space virus from my grandfather, who was very much into it and has been following the space programs of Apollo and everything very, very closely. And today I am also working a bit in the technical space industry. I'm a project manager in Borospace, which is a Slovak startup building suborbital rockets and developing sustainable rocket fuel for ESA. But that's not necessarily a must-have as a space psychologist. It's just I have a very broad interest in the space industry. And of course, I would really like to go to space one day. So I tried first, I applied to as a crew candidate for Dear Moon. I made it into round 2, but then I got deselected. And now I have bought 1,000 tickets for winning a seat on the Blue Origin spacecraft. So I still have some chances of going, but space tourism is increasing. So I think within my lifetime I will definitely have the chance of actually going into space. Yeah, so that's about me. What we're going to talk about today, Professor Julio already mentioned, yeah, what do we know about space psychology? What do we still have to find out? Yeah, first of all, I would start with a small introduction to space psychology. Yeah, what is it about? What does a space psychologist do and why? And then a very high level overview of some current research. Because we only have 1 hour, so we cannot go too much into depth. And then I would also like to take a look how analog space missions can actually contribute to research in space psychology. And last not least, what does research into space psychology mean for solving problems on Earth? Yeah, so let's start with a brief introduction. So what is space psychology about? So we have a lot of research areas in space psychology. It starts with isolation and confinement. How are people dealing with that? How are people dealing with that alone or in groups, in small groups versus large groups? How does it impact us as human beings? How does space flight impact our cognitive functions? Yeah, maybe if we are in microgravity, a lot of our blood gets redistributed because we don't have as we don't have gravity, the blood doesn't go down and the heart has to pump it back up and pump it in circles. This works a bit differently. How do people deal with a lack of personal space and a lack of privacy? How can we overcome this? Yeah, a lot of us have experienced it during the COVID pandemic. Yeah, we're all of a sudden, we can't go to the office for work, but we're sitting at home. We're surrounded maybe by family, by kids, by pets, by noisy neighbors. How do we deal with that? Yeah, so and of course it's the same in space and also even in analog missions. Yeah, you can see at Julio's background, you have a model of a space habitat. This is not a very big space, and you have to give up a lot of personal space, a lot of privacy to be there, even on an analog mission here on Earth. Yeah, we have to investigate how people deal with anxiety. Now, it's basically you're sitting on hundreds of thousands of tons of explosives on top of a rocket, and you're flying at an incredible speed around the Earth and maybe towards some unknown territories. Imagine that the first people really going to Mars, what kind of anxiety they must experience, because yeah, it's never been done before. But if we look at longer space flight, especially imagine we are flying to Mars, yeah, we are almost 6 months on the way to Mars, sitting in the spaceship. So also boredom will set in. Yeah, what do we do? Yeah, we don't have a tennis court that we can go to and play sports. We don't have, we can't go for a walk in the forest. It's the options of what to do, how to keep ourselves occupied are quite limited. So we will experience boredom. Yeah, we need to research into team dynamics. Yeah, how will we cope with conflicts in teams when we cannot just close the door behind us because there is no door. Yeah, we have a so-called third quarter phenomenon. Yeah, if we go on a mission for 1 year, yeah, after 6 months, 6 to 9 months, we expect to see mood swings towards the negative. And it doesn't matter really how long the mission is. We have this in 1 month long missions. We have this in 3 year long missions. It just, in the third quarter, people kind of have the concept that they've already been here too long, but the end is not yet in sight. Yeah, there's still too much time to spend actually in the habitat, in the rocket, or wherever. We will have to deal with a lot of negative reactions towards unwanted tasks. Imagine you study rocket science and many other things. You train 10 years to become an astronaut, and then you have to wash the dishes every day. Yeah. Also, we have had reports from the International Space Stations that people get really sick of having to do 2 hours of exercise every day, but it has to be done to keep your muscle mass and your bone strength. But there are negative psychological reactions towards these unwanted tasks, but still they have to be done. Now, there is personal behavior. How do I deal with it all? How do I feel? How do I react to certain things? Yeah. And again, we can't just run away from anything. Now, we're in a rocket or in a habitat in space or in an analog habitat on Earth. We cannot just run away. So we have to know how we adjust our personal behavior. This is, for example, I want to go to space desperately, but I don't want to go to Mars. For the one reason, I know that my personal behavior is to open the window all the time, to have fresh air all the time, to go for walks all the time. And I am absolutely not sure that I would be able to adjust my behavior sitting in an air-conditioned small room with no fresh air, with no possibility to just walk outside. Yeah. Another thing that space psychologists research is human technology interactions. Some of you might already have experience with that. Yeah, talking to Siri. Hey Siri, what's the weather going to be tomorrow? That's a human technology interactions. But of course, if we really want to go to Mars, or even if we want to go forward to the moon, we need more technology. We need a lot of technology to support people, yeah, to make tasks easier, and also to minimize the number of people we actually need to take along. Yeah, because we cannot explore a planet or a planetary body with just technology. We need some humans involved at a certain stage, but we should, of course, minimize the risk to humans. Yeah. And And some of you might have seen this Simon, this artificial intelligence assistant that Alexander Gerst had brought to the International Space Station. Yeah, it's from a psychological point of view, if you look at it, it's like anthropomorphic. It looks human, yeah, it smiles. And so we like to interact with technology that has a bit of a human touch. Yeah. So that's an important field to study in terms of space psychology. Also, the lack of control or perceived lack of control. If you're an astronaut, mission control tells you what you have to do, even in analog missions. Yeah, in the last analog missions, I was in Austria for the Austrian Space Forum. We had the Amadee 20 mission in Israel for 1 month. I was a flight planner, and we make flight plans telling the analog astronauts what they have to do per 15-minute slots. So from 8 to 8:15, you do this. From 8:15 to 8:30, you have breakfast. From 8:30 to 8:45, you fill in these 3 questionnaires. So there is a lot of external control. And people react to that differently, of course, and some are okay with it. They just do as they're told, but some, especially in longer duration stays, they feel, no, I now want to make my own decisions again. Yeah. Then, of course, space psychology is involved in spacecraft and habitat design. Yeah, because we want to feel well. We want the astronauts to feel well, to have a nice habitat, not only a functional one, but also people have to make it their home. Yeah. So this is also about making people feel okay, feel this homely atmosphere, etc. Then, of course, one topic is homesickness. Especially if we go to Mars for at least 1.5 years, because earlier than that, it's not possible to come back, really. And homesickness in terms of not just missing certain specific people, but also missing things. Yeah, missing your favorite food, missing, I don't know, your car. People do miss their cars, some of them. So that's also something to look into. And last not least, reintegration. If we imagine someone traveling to Mars and coming back 1.5 years later, they will have totally changed. And there will not be any other person in their friends or family circles who can really understand what they've been through. Yeah, so it can be very challenging to readjust after going to space, especially for a long time. But we saw it also in the Apollo program. Yeah, Buzz Aldrin unfortunately had serious issues of reintegration after he came back. I mean, he's totally fine now. So great guy, one of my heroes. So. We have not to only think of going there, but also coming back. Yeah. So basically, what we're looking at is space psychology. We start supporting crews and other people preparing for space flight. Yeah, that starts, of course, at selection. Yeah. How do you select astronauts? How do you select a mission control team? Yeah. And how do you train them? How do you prepare them? And here we have to be very, very careful, because more often than not, everyone is focused on the crew, on the astronauts, analog astronauts or spacefaring astronauts, and mission control are forgotten. Astronauts' family and friends are usually not included. And So there is still a lot of tasks to fulfill, of research to be done in this area. But one of the major tasks of space psychologists in this case is, of course, crew selection, team selection for the MSc and training. Yeah, and then off they go into space, which comes with all kinds of let's imagine we are going to Mars, 6 months going there. We have to deal with the boredom, with workload issues, with team behavior, with conflict, etc. We have then stay on Mars, for example, for 6 months, or on the moon or on the ISS. How do people adjust to the new environment, especially if they're there for a longer time? Well, also if, for example, if we look back at the last analog mission, it was 1 month in the desert in Israel. Also that needs some adjustment. You have to make it your home for 1 full month. And maybe we are also conducting some longer in-person missions in Habitat Marte next year. That would be very, very interesting to see how that works out, to run some more psychological experiments, to maybe run the same experiments we did in other analog missions and compare the results. So that we still have a lot to do. And of course, we're not only talking about research, but about psychological support of people. If they have a problem, they feel depressed, they are homesick, they're bored, they're totally stressed out. That there is somebody there who can talk to them. That there are some measures prepared to help them on the spot, some protocols, so that we can guarantee their psychological safety all along. And that also, it goes not only for the astronauts, it goes for the entire team that is involved in the mission, mission support, friends and families. They all have to deal with it, even in an analog mission. As a flight planner, it's kind of stressful because it's a very, very high workload, and everything changes every 5 minutes, basically. So you have to be very flexible. You have to react, and we have to, as space psychologists, always be on guard that nothing gets out of control, that people are maintaining their psychological well-being, or if they lose it, that they regain it as soon as possible. And then, of course, preparing for return to Earth, and actually then continuing life on Earth with all its challenges after having been to outer space. It's kind of interesting because I'm also working in intercultural environments, and I have also been in the situation that Slovakia is the 9th country I'm living in. So I've been moving around a lot, and it takes some adjustment when you come back from multiple years abroad. Because it changes you as a person, it changes your experience, it changes your perspective. And when I came back and I met my family, and they were like staring at me like an animal in the zoo. They didn't understand me anymore, and I didn't really understand them anymore, because we had developed in totally different directions, and that's also a challenge. And of course, the entire space psychology will become more and more important now that we have started taking tourists into space. And over the next 5-10 years, we will see an enormous amount of tourists, an enormous number, I should say, not amount, an enormous number of tourists traveling to space. And they will have to deal with anxiety, with stress, with team dynamics, etc. And they're not fully trained astronauts. Yeah, they have usually 4 to 5 months or 3 to 4 months preparation, but they don't get the full training that a commercial astronaut does. Who have trainings for several years. But then again, having said that, I recently spoke to a NASA astronaut, and I asked her, so what kind of psychological training did you get before you went up to the space station? And she said, none. So that's, of course, also a bit of a risk factor, and something that we should consider. But I mean, they are at least selected for psychological stability, for certain traits, for their ability to cope with risks and to cope with frequent changes. Space tourists are not. They will not be selected in that way. They will be selected in a way that, hey, do you have $150,000 to pay for the ticket? Yes, okay, come on. There will be of course, some medical checks. But there is there's not much of psychological training going on here, and that's a bit of a risk. Yeah. So apart from supporting crews during space flights, and again, I have to say that's not only the crews that go to space, but also the team that stays on the ground. We do research as space psychologists. Yeah, it's still a relatively young science, and of course always with a view of how can we apply this on Earth, and also how can we apply lessons from Earth to spaceflight. Now it goes both ways. So yeah, that's a bit about the space psychology. Again, high level overview, very high level. There are, of course, hundreds of findings. I have just picked a couple of them. And first of all, several researchers, here is an example of Patel, Brunstedt, Tarve, etc. This is also acknowledged by space agencies. That isolation and confinement, along with all the challenges that this brings about, is actually one of the 5 major hazards of human Mars exploration. Yeah, so it's not something that comes in number 87, 88. Yeah, it's in the top 5 risks. So that shows how important this field is now, and will even be more important in the future if we are really going to Mars. Yeah, and I can assure you the rockets will be ready far earlier than people will be ready for this. Yeah. And also, this is from NASA as well. It shows that the longer the mission lasts and the further we go away from Earth, the higher the psychological risk is. Yeah. So if we go for 2 weeks to the ISS, we're still in green. Now, it's not a big psychological risk. Now, people will be there for a couple of days, they do their work and they go back. Yeah. But if we're looking at longer stays, 30 days to 1 year, the risk already increases. And of course, in Mars, we have a combination of both being far away, and because we're so far away, we have to be traveling there, being there, and travel back for a long time. There is no 2-week trip to Mars. It simply doesn't work. So psychological risks becomes increasingly more important the further away we go and the longer we're staying. So, and then there is there is one relatively interesting research from also the same group of researchers. They have analyzed the statements the flight crews made relating to adjustment. Yeah. So fatigue was not such a big issue, but if you look, for example, at visitors crew rotation, yeah, in the later stages of the mission, that became more and more of an issue. Yeah. So that can mean that maybe the crew became like a family and they didn't want to have any outsiders. They didn't want to see one friend leaving the ISS and another one coming. Now, thoughts of home remain, for example, relatively stable throughout the mission. Perception of time, relatively stable. But like high morale, you see the third quarter. Also the second quarter, it goes like a bit down. The morale goes a bit down. So it's not as high as it is right in the beginning and right in the end. Yeah. So these are some challenges over the time of the mission. And again, it doesn't really matter how long the mission is. If it's 1 month or 1 year, you have these first, second, third, fourth quarter changes in some of the aspects. Yeah. So we already know, of course, a bit about space psychology research, but again, there are quite a lot of gaps still. First of all, we don't have too much research on female astronauts for the simple reason that almost, I think, 88%, 87, 88% of all astronauts have been men. So, and women react differently to psychological issues. Yeah. We have diversity in space. We don't know. We have now with Dr. Sian Proctor was the 4th African-American African-American woman in space. So we haven't got much diversity there. We have now ESA has made a crew call also, and especially for disabled people going to space, which is an absolute first. And yeah, I mean, some disabilities are less important or even unimportant in space. Yeah, for example, if you have no legs, it's an issue on Earth. It's not an issue if you're in microgravity, because you can just kind of walk around with your hands and glide and yeah. So we need more research on that, and also how we can better integrate diverse people from various backgrounds. I haven't seen a lot of research into positive space psychology. That means psychology is often very much focused on negative things. Yeah, how can we overcome depression? Yeah, how can we overcome anxiety? How can we overcome stress? But this is just getting us to a point zero. But positive psychology would get us above zero. Yeah, what makes people happy in space? What do people enjoy in space? How can we create a habitat on Mars that is really a joy to live in, not only avoiding kind of psychological issues, but actually enhance well-being. Yeah. We still have very little research on extreme stays in space. That means extreme in terms of duration. We haven't had many studies for more than a year or two, because it's also of course, a bit of an ethical question if you want to lock up people for 2 years somewhere in the desert or in Antarctica, but also in more extreme environments. Yeah, Habitat Mate is a very good space analog station, but still, if something really bad happens, you can still open the door and walk out. Yeah, if you're on Mars, you cannot do that. Yeah, so the psychological pressure is not the same. And psychological training and prevention, especially in view of space tourism. How do we prepare these people for going into space? Then also inclusion of the Mission Support Center, the friends and family of the astronauts, and there has been even some discussion about amongst analog astronauts. Yeah, how do you cope with being away from your family for a full month? Yeah, away from your children. So it's not only people who actually fly into space, but also who work in analog missions. Yeah. Psychological analogs, as I said, it's not the same psychological feeling if you can open the door in a case of emergency and the rescue helicopter will take 15 minutes max to get to you. Then if you're on the way to Mars and there is no way out. Yeah. Also, there is still very little research on reintegration, how we can make reintegration for astronauts easier. Also, if we think about a mission to Mars, also the mission support people, they will be totally absorbed into that project. And they will be absorbed into that project for years. It's like the Apollo program. Now people have been working there until it got cancelled, and then what? All of a sudden they were out of a job. They were moved away from their colleagues whom they considered family. Many of them became close friends, and it just stopped. So what then? So we need to also look into this, really. Yeah. And coming back to psychological analogs, one type of analog mission that can actually is actually quite close, psychologically speaking, to really going to space, and these are underwater missions. And we have, for example, there are only 2 underwater space habitats in the world. One is NASA's Nemo, and the other one is Hydronaut in the Czech Republic. And here astronauts, or aquanauts as we call them, they go into this. You see this habitat here. This is submerged into the water, and they live on if you look at the bottom left picture, in a very, very, very confined space, and it's very functional. Yeah, there is no photos, no decoration, nothing. It's really, really very functional and very sparse. They have to do their research. They have to live there. If you look at this picture, yeah, we have an aquanaut doing an EVA. Yeah, you can't just walk out. You have to get into, in this case, a diving suit. On Mars, it would be a spacesuit. And you are kind of in microgravity underwater. Yeah. And if you look at the bottom, the bottom right, it looks like a bit spacey. Yeah, you don't have the sunlight as we used to. Everything is kind of a bit blurred because of the water. So that comes psychologically very close to actually going to space. And the thing is also, depending on the depth where you put the habitat, it might take longer to decompress, to get back to the surface, than to come back from the International Space Station. Now, International Space Station, they have an emergency escape. They have a Crew Dragon or a Soyuz capsule, and they go in there, and within like 3-4 hours, they're back on Earth. Yeah, but depending on which depth you put the habitat, it can take a lot longer to get back to the surface than it actually takes from the ISS. Yeah, so the psychological feeling is a bit the same. You know that you're on your own. You know that you cannot just open the door and walk out and see a doctor or go to hospital. It's just not possible. Yeah, so that is psychologically much closer to habitats on Earth. But anyway, yeah, in which way can analog missions contribute in general? Yeah, we can, for example, study team performance comparison between co-located and distributed teams. Yeah? If a group of analog astronauts inside the habitat, for example, in Habitat Marte, have a task to fulfill, or if they have to fulfill the same task in cooperation with some people from mission control, yeah? How does it differ? And also in terms of time, yeah, in the Amade 20 mission, we had built in a time delay in communication of 10 minutes. Yeah, so we could send messages to the habitat, but they would get it 10 minutes later. Then they would read it and then they would answer it. So we had to wait at least 20 minutes for every question to be answered. And to study that is also quite interesting, because that's what we will have on Mars as well. We don't have this direct communication, and you cannot make a phone call from Mars to Earth. It's technically possible, but it doesn't make sense, because you say something and then you have to wait 20 minutes until the other person replies. Now, so this is something we can also study in analog space missions. Yeah, also impact of isolation on a group's psychological health. Yeah, also individual, of course. The relationship between the crew and the mission support center, the relationship with their families, also intercultural issues in diverse flight crews. And not only issues, we're talking also about positive psychology. How can we combine the knowledge and the approaches from different cultures in a way to create synergies, to create better problem solving, etc. Yeah. Also, coping in extreme or stressful environments can be studied in analog missions. Yeah, we just spoke about underwater missions in Antarctica, but also if you're sitting in a desert or a semi-arid zone in Habitat Marte in Brazil, yeah, it is also a stressful environment, because you can't just do as you please. Yeah, you have to follow protocols. You cannot just close the door. So we are gaining a lot of insights also from these missions. Yeah, we have fluctuation of team cohesion. Yeah, when is the team really sticking together? Yeah, because we have this forming, storming, norming, performing, adjourning phases. Yeah, what happens if a team member is changed, like they do on the International Space Station? Yeah, they have a permanent crew of 6, then they send two back to Earth, and they bring in 2 new people. Yeah, how does that affect the team dynamics? Yeah, and also, as I already said, habitat design. How do astronauts feel better And also Professor Julia is making a lot of research, is doing a lot of research in Habitat Marte to make it green, yeah, to include plants, yeah, some greenery, to have the analog astronauts grow their own food. All this is very important to find out before we even think about sending a person to Mars. Yeah, so and even virtual analog missions, which Professor Julie has started in Habitat Marte because of the COVID situation. Also, these missions, even if we're not in the habitat, we can still contribute to research in space psychology, yeah, by, for example, discovering and outlining new research questions or hypotheses. We can do meta-analysis, yeah, comparison of analog or real space missions. We can contribute to the development of protocols, of psychological safety measures. Now we can do the design and evaluation of psychological trainings, and etc., etc. So there is a lot of opportunity even for virtual analog missions to make real contributions to space psychology. So, and last not least, because we are almost at the top of the hour, what does it do on Earth? Yeah, obviously the main contribution of research in space psychology contributes to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal number 3, to improve good health and well-being. Yeah, for example, we get input from analog astronauts and astronauts managing isolation during lockdown in a pandemic. Yeah, we've basically all been on our own analog missions for the past 2 years. Yeah, also we gain a better understanding of isolation and loneliness. Yeah, we have more and more old people living alone. So what does it do to them psychologically? Yeah, how do we deal with homesickness? Yeah, we have not only a pandemic and the climate crisis, we also have a refugee crisis, which we tend to forget in these days. Yeah, refugees, how do they deal with being away from home and maybe not ever able to return there? Yeah, so how can we contribute with space psychology to ease those issues? Yeah, another big point is in general the destigmatization. In many cultures, it's fine if you say I have the flu, but it's not fine to say I'm depressed, I am stressed, I'm burned out. Yeah, it has kind of a stigma. But when an astronaut, yeah, who are really kind of in many cases still heroes, if they can say that, then it also contributes to awareness and to more acceptance of psychological issues here on Earth. Yeah. We get better insight into the management of remote teams from space psychology. We get better support for individuals in home office. Yeah, how do you, for example, if you're living in a one-room flat, how can you separate your work area from your living area, and how do you avoid being constantly thinking about work and not calming down? Yeah, we can learn some tricks and some solutions from space psychology. Yeah, we can learn how to better adjust to changes, because in space we don't know what we don't know. We don't know what we will find when we go to Mars. So we have to, we can make a plan, but I can promise you, we have to throw it away as soon as we get there, and we have to change it. And even in analog missions, we have to, I don't know how many versions of the flight plan we had every day, because something was changing. Yeah, and obviously we're also learning better problem solving techniques and how we can better learn during crisis. Yeah, because in space there is always some crisis. It's never really smooth. So yeah, that's basically it for today. Very high level overview. And I think we already have some questions. Caroline is asking, how about a documentary in space? Yeah, there are some projects really, yeah, making documentaries, but it's also, of course, a bit tricky, because who should make this documentary? You need media people, you need camera persons, you need lighting engineers. So if you want to make a really good quality documentary, you would have to fly a media crew up there. But there are some documentaries about life in space. There are some from the ISS. There are some from the Inspiration 4 mission from SpaceX. Yeah, I think you can just Google them and you will find those documentaries. And yeah, you need the document of this. I think you are talking about getting the slides. Yes, also the video. I think Professor Julio will make this available for the participants on YouTube. And yeah, what are main problems that would disturb psychological balance in an analog space mission? Yeah, there is, of course, different personalities that can clash, different cultures that can clash. It's stress and workload. Now, some of the especially high fidelity analog missions were really, the astronauts are kept busy from 6 o'clock in the morning till 10 at night. They get stressed. Yeah. And if the mission is longer, they also miss their family, they miss their friends, they miss their pets. For example, formation of subgroups in a crew of analog astronauts can disturb psychological balance. Yeah, if you have 6 crew team members and 2 of them are really close friends, and all of a sudden they start splitting up from the entire group and keep to themselves. It can be what we saw that in some, I think it was in the Mars 500, that different languages led to the formation of subgroups. They were just part of the crew was just sitting together speaking Russians, and the other speaking Russian, and the non-Russian speaking people, they would sit on the other end of the table and speak English. So that can actually contribute to some psychological imbalances. Yeah. So yeah, which is the most important aspect for the astronauts to be more resilient in space? Training, of course. Getting to know your own limitations, your own ability to cope with things that are not to your liking, or too much for you, etc., etc. This is why they take astronauts, or for example, NASA, ESA, they take their astronauts, they take them to the desert, they take them hiking up mountains, they take them into the wilderness, just to expose them to stress and to actually investigate, to let them find their limits, and also let them be surprised as if they can actually overcome these limitations, because a lot of limitations are actually in our heads. Yeah. There is another question. Since the 60s, there is a good lot of studies on stimuli isolation and the psychological effects. Could it be useful in space training? Yes, definitely. I'm not sure to which extent, but in general, absolutely, it can be used. Yeah. Has there been any incident to date where, after returning from long-term mission on ISS, astronauts faced major psychological setback? I think the biggest psychological setback that has been made public, so we can talk about, was actually not from the ISS, but from Apollo, when Buzz Aldrin came back. So he ran into major psychological issues. And luckily, he was able to also overcome them, and to date leads a very happy life, as it seems. Yeah, it's also a bit difficult to say, because I have spoken personally to more than 20 astronauts who have been in space from all over the world, and if I ask them such questions, they always yeah, kind of tell me that, oh, sorry, we have signed an NDA and I'm not allowed to talk about this. But yes, we know that there have been incidents, not only after the astronauts coming back, but also during their stay. There has been major conflict on the space stations there. Yeah. So we know about this, but I'm not allowed to quote it here anyways. Okay. So any more questions? You're also welcome to unmute yourself and ask your questions on audio. Yeah, in audio. What is the role of the commander? Yeah, the commander is of course kind of a hopefully supportive leader, making their team grow, supporting the team, getting problems out of the way, and in case of emergency, when a democratic decision is not possible because something has to be decided on the spot, the commander is the one taking the decision usually. But the commander should also care about the well-being psychologically, not only physically, but also psychologically of the team.
Okay, Karin, congratulations for your wonderful webinar. Also, I remember this last question because sometimes when the astronauts would be facing a lot of, sometimes if they have like a overload of activities, sometimes the commander needs to recognize if they are becoming with burnout syndrome, something like this, to try to how to fix, how to balance the situation, because in mathematics is something in now in personal missions that something that we saw sometimes that we have a lot of work to do, and sometimes we are going to sleep lately.
Yes.
And wake up early, and sometimes just sleep some hours. Not good. And
yeah, I mean, a good commander and a good yeah. A good commander and around them, the entire mission structure, yeah, the mission director, flight director, they should, of course, create an atmosphere and make sure everybody has the necessary training, because firstly, the responsibility is with the astronaut to raise their hand and say, here, I have too high a workload, I can't take it anymore. Yeah. If they don't stand up and say so, yeah, the commander should keep an eye. We're also normally in missions, of course, monitoring the psychological status also from the mission support, from human factors teams, from BME. The astronauts, they have to fill in questionnaires, sometimes once a day, sometimes 3 times a day, how they're feeling. Yeah. The heart rates are monitored, especially when they're out on EVA. So there are also some indications, early indicators to see if someone is in danger of burning out. Yeah, they're also monitored how many hours do they sleep, for example. Yeah, and if we see that one specific astronaut only sleeps 2 or 3 hours for several nights in a row, then of course it's time for an intervention. But of course, we must not forget the options and the responsibility to self-report. Because if one astronaut is really overworked or burned out, then it can pose a risk to the other team members, especially if they go on EVA. Yeah, somebody can just be unobservant and they stumble and fall and break a leg or break an expensive piece of equipment. So they should be trained, and there should be an organizational culture, a mission culture, allowing them to raise their hand without negative consequences.
Yes, also everyone can present your questions or points, sometimes something to contribute about the discussion. Everybody are welcome.
Yeah, you're also welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn or write me an email if you have more questions after this presentation, because sometimes we have to sleep sleep it over, and then the question comes to us the next morning at breakfast or on a walk.
Okay, Karin, I'll be stopping the recording, okay? Just a moment. Thanks so much.